You are not lacking time, you are losing yourself every morning before you even notice it. Each day you wake and allow thoughts to enter your mind without question, and they begin governing your choices before reason has a chance to speak. That is why your actions feel scattered and your peace feels fragile, even when nothing external is wrong. What follows will show you how to take control back from impulse and return authority to your own judgment through simple Stoic discipline rooted in what depends on you and what does not. If you find value in this kind of honest practice, consider subscribing so you stay close to a community focused on reason, discipline, and inner clarity rather than distraction and reaction. Stay here with full attention because what you are about to learn is not theory but daily training for a mind that refuses to be ruled by anything outside its control and begins each morning with steadiness instead of drift. Number 1. Command your mind before emotion commands your entire day. You wake up, and within minutes your mind already belongs to something outside you. A message changes your mood. A memory tightens your chest. A single inconvenience begins directing your thoughts like a master pulling a chain. Before the day has even begun, you are reacting, not choosing, not governing, reacting. And then you wonder why peace feels distant. You wonder why your mind feels heavy. You wonder why your life keeps moving in circles despite all your promises to change. Look carefully at what is happening inside you each morning. Your first thoughts are not examined. Your first emotions are not questioned. You rise from bed and immediately hand authority to impulse. You allow fear to speak before reason. You allow desire to speak before discipline. You allow comfort to decide what kind of man you will be before your own judgment even enters the room. This is not a small weakness. This is the beginning of self-betrayal. A human being who cannot command his own mind in the first hour of the day will spend the rest of the day obeying whatever emotion arrives next. Anger will direct his speech. Anxiety will direct his decisions. Laziness will direct his actions. Approval from others will direct his values. He will call this stress. He will call this personality. He will call this normal life. But the truth is simpler and harder to face. He has surrendered the government of himself. You already know this feeling. You know what it is to wake up determined and then lose yourself before noon. You know what it is to promise discipline and then negotiate with every craving. You know what it is to replay conversations in your mind instead of mastering the thoughts creating the disturbance. You know the exhaustion of being dragged through the day by emotions you never stopped to examine. The undisciplined mind does not destroy a life all at once. It does it through small permissions repeated daily. One morning of indulgence becomes a habit. One unexamined reaction becomes a temperament. One excuse repeated long enough becomes identity. A man does not suddenly become weak. He practices weakness every morning until it feels natural. So hear this clearly. The first battle of the day is not with the world, it is with your own judgment. Before you speak to anyone, before you check any screen, before you complain about any burden, you must decide who governs your mind, reason or impulse. Discipline or emotion, choice or reaction. The person who wins this battle early carries a different spirit through the entire day, not because life becomes easier. Life remains uncertain, people remain difficult, circumstances remain unstable, but the disciplined mind no longer waits for perfect conditions before maintaining inner order. It understands something most people avoid their entire lives. Peace does not come from controlling events. Peace comes from controlling the judgment you place upon events. You suffer more from your opinions than from reality itself. Look honestly at your own life and you will see it. A delayed message becomes rejection. A criticism becomes humiliation. An inconvenience becomes outrage. A difficult morning becomes a ruined day. The event enters your mind neutral. Your judgment turns it into suffering. This is why the first words you must tell yourself every morning are not words of comfort. They are words of command. Command your mind before emotion commands your entire day. Not later. Not when you feel motivated. Not after your coffee. Immediately. The mind left unattended becomes a dangerous ruler. It seeks ease instead of virtue. It seeks distraction instead of truth. It seeks emotional escape instead of rational action. And if you never interrupt these tendencies, they become chains stronger than iron because you begin defending them as part of yourself. But you are not your first emotion. You are not your passing fear. You are not your anger. You are not the impulse rising inside you. You are the faculty capable of examining these things and deciding whether they deserve obedience. That is your power, and that power must be trained daily. Each morning, sit quietly before the noise of the world enters you, even for 5 minutes, especially when you do not feel like it. Sit and observe the condition of your mind honestly. Ask yourself what is already trying to rule you. Is it resentment? Is it fear? Is it craving? Is it self-pity? Is it laziness disguised as exhaustion? Do not judge yourself emotionally for finding these things. Simply refuse to lie about them. A disciplined life begins with accurate self-observation. Most people avoid silence because silence exposes the disorder they spend the day trying to outrun. The moment external stimulation disappears, they meet themselves directly and they do not like what they see. So they fill every empty moment with noise, music, notifications, endless talking, endless consuming, endless escape. But the Stoic does the opposite. He enters silence deliberately because he knows the unexamined mind cannot be trusted. When you sit with yourself each morning, do not ask how you feel. Feelings change like weather. Ask instead what is required of you today regardless of emotion. This question changes everything. It pulls you out of passivity and returns you to responsibility. Perhaps you are tired. Still act with discipline. Perhaps you are anxious. Still act with reason. Perhaps you are frustrated. Still speak with restraint. Your emotional condition does not excuse you from your moral responsibility. This is where inner freedom begins, not when emotions disappear, but when emotions stop dictating your conduct. You have trained yourself for years to obey every feeling immediately. You feel irritation and you speak sharply. You feel discomfort and you avoid effort. You feel boredom and you reach for distraction. You feel insecurity and you seek validation. Then you wonder why your mind feels weak. A mind becomes weak through constant obedience to impulse. Strength comes when impulse no longer receives automatic permission. The next time emotion rises in you, pause before acting. This pause is one of the most important disciplines you will ever practice. Between stimulus and response, there is a space where reason can enter. Most people never use this space. They react instantly and then spend hours repairing damage caused by a moment of emotional surrender. Train yourself differently. When anger rises, do not immediately speak. When anxiety rises, do not immediately believe it. When desire rises, do not immediately obey it. Pause and examine. Ask yourself whether this reaction serves virtue or merely serves comfort. Ask whether this impulse deserves authority over your conduct. Ask whether you are acting as a rational human being or merely behaving like an untrained animal responding to sensation. This practice feels difficult because your mind has been conditioned towards speed and indulgence. But difficulty is not evidence you should stop. Difficulty is evidence that discipline is finally confronting habit. Understand this deeply. Every morning you are shaping your character whether you realize it or not. Character is not built in dramatic moments. It is built in repeated decisions so small they often escape notice. The decision to rise when you wanted more comfort. The decision to remain calm when irritation appeared. the decision to speak honestly instead of protectively, the decision to direct attention instead of scatter it. These moments seem insignificant while they happen, but repeated daily they become destiny. The person who cannot govern his attention cannot govern his life. Your attention is your inner kingdom. Whatever controls it controls you. If every distraction can steal your focus, then your mind belongs to the world instead of yourself. Look at how quickly your attention collapses. A notification interrupts your purpose. A criticism interrupts your peace. A temptation interrupts your discipline. Your mind jumps from thought to thought without command. This is not freedom. This is servitude. So begin reclaiming authority over attention itself. When you wake up, do not immediately flood your mind with the opinions, fears, and noise of others. Guard the entrance to your mind carefully. What enters repeatedly shapes what you become. If the first thing you consume every morning is outrage, comparison, vanity, or distraction, then do not be surprised when your mind becomes restless and weak. Instead, begin the day with deliberate thought. Remind yourself that difficulty is unavoidable. Remind yourself that people will disappoint you. Remind yourself that comfort is not the goal of life. Remind yourself that your judgments remain within your control, even when circumstances do not. This is not pessimism. It is preparation. The prepared mind suffers less because it is not shocked by reality. Many people destroy their peace through hidden expectations. They expect people to behave rationally. They expect life to unfold according to preference. They expect comfort without discipline. Then reality refuses cooperation and they collapse emotionally because they built their peace upon conditions they never controlled. Do not make this mistake. Your peace must come from within your own conduct, not from outcomes, not from praise, not from ease. The moment your inner stability depends upon external conditions, you become fragile. A disciplined mind remains steady because it understands the difference between what belongs to it and what does not. Your actions belong to you. Your judgments belong to you. Your choices belong to you, but reputation does not belong to you. Circumstances do not belong to you. The behavior of others does not belong to you. Every morning, remind yourself of this separation until it becomes instinct. Much suffering comes from trying to control what was never yours to command. And while you are training your mind each morning, do not forget the body. Comfort weakens both body and character when worshipped constantly. Practice voluntary discomfort regularly. Rise when you wish to remain in bed. Take the cold air without complaint. Delay unnecessary pleasures. Finish difficult tasks before easy ones. Speak less than you want to. Listen longer than feels comfortable. These small disciplines teach the mind an essential lesson. You do not have to obey every urge. Without this training, people become slaves to preference. They need comfort to remain calm. They need pleasure to remain motivated. They need praise to remain confident. But the disciplined person learns to remain stable even without these things because he has practiced standing apart from desire. This does not make life joyless. It makes joy independent from external dependence. There is also another truth you must face honestly each morning. Time is leaving whether you govern yourself or not. You are not preparing for some distant future where discipline will suddenly become necessary. Your life is happening now. Every wasted morning becomes part of the life you will never recover. Look at the number of mornings already lost to confusion, distraction, resentment, and avoidance. Look honestly without self-hatred, but also without excuses. The years disappear quickly for the person who never learns to govern himself. Do not wait for crisis before becoming disciplined. Train now while the day still belongs to you. The greatest tragedy is not pain. Pain can instruct. Failure can instruct. Hardship can strengthen judgment. The greatest tragedy is reaching the end of life, having never truly governed your own mind for even a single day. Imagine carrying your emotions like chains for decades. Imagine obeying every fear until fear becomes identity. Imagine spending your life blaming circumstances while never examining your own judgments. This is how many people live. Not because freedom was impossible, because self-examination was uncomfortable. But you are capable of more. You are capable of pausing before reaction. You are capable of enduring discomfort without surrender. You are capable of directing attention intentionally. You are capable of speaking with restraint even when emotion burns inside you. You are capable of acting according to reason instead of appetite. This capacity already exists within you, but potential means nothing without practice. Philosophy is not decoration for the intellect, it is training for conduct. If your understanding does not change how you live, then you are merely collecting words while remaining governed by the same impulses. So tomorrow morning, begin differently. Before the world enters your mind, sit in stillness. Examine your thoughts honestly. Separate what you control from what you do not. Prepare yourself for difficulty without fear. Commit yourself to virtue before comfort. Then carry this discipline into the day moment by moment. When irritation appears, remember your training. When temptation appears, remember your training. When fear appears, remember your training. Your life changes through repeated acts of self-governance, not through sudden emotional transformation. Do not expect perfection, expect resistance. The mind trained for years toward impulse will not surrender immediately. Some mornings you will fail. Some days emotion will overtake judgment. Some moments you will react before reflecting. But failure becomes dangerous only when you stop examining yourself honestly. Each evening, review the day carefully. Where did emotion govern you? Where did reason remain steady? Where did you betray your own principles for comfort, approval, or anger? Do not perform this examination to punish yourself. Perform it to correct yourself. A person unwilling to examine himself remains permanently immature regardless of age. And understand this final truth clearly. No one is coming to govern your mind for you. No circumstance will suddenly make discipline effortless. No external success will remove the need for inner mastery. If you refuse this work, your emotions will continue ruling your conduct until the end of your life. But if you begin now with seriousness and consistency, then something changes quietly inside you. The mind becomes less chaotic. Reactions slow down. Attention sharpens. Desires weaken. Fear loses authority. You stop feeling dragged through life by every passing emotion. You begin standing upright within yourself. That is freedom. Not freedom to do whatever impulse demands. Freedom from being enslaved by impulse at all. So when you wake tomorrow, do not immediately reach for distraction. Do not immediately obey mood. Do not immediately surrender your peace to circumstances waiting outside your door. Sit with yourself first. Command your mind before emotion commands your entire day. Then rise and live as someone finally prepared to govern himself. Number 2. Accept only what reason proves worthy of attention today. Your mind is being robbed every day by things that never deserved your attention in the first place. A careless remark steals your peace for hours. A delayed response occupies your thoughts while your real responsibilities remain untouched. A stranger's opinion enters your mind, and suddenly your mood changes as if you handed authority over your inner state to someone who has never examined their own life for even a moment. This is not a small problem. This is the quiet destruction of reason. You believe you are thinking freely while your attention is being dragged from one impulse to another without discipline or examination. You call it stress. You call it overthinking. You call it being emotional. But look more honestly. Your suffering often begins long before the event itself harms you. It begins the moment you grant importance to something unworthy of your attention. A disciplined mind does not give equal value to every thought entering consciousness. It examines, it questions, it decides carefully what deserves entry and what deserves rejection. This is one of the deepest responsibilities of a rational human being. Your attention shapes your character, because whatever repeatedly occupies the mind eventually governs behavior. Look carefully at what you permit into your thoughts every morning. Complaint, comparison, fear, envy, imagined conflict, regret over things already finished, anxiety over things that have not yet happened. Then you wonder why your inner life feels restless. You feed disorder into the mind and expect peace to emerge from it. Peace cannot grow in a mind that welcomes every disturbance as a guest. The undisciplined person believes every thought deserves belief. The Stoic understands that thoughts arrive automatically, but judgment remains a choice. This distinction changes an entire life. A thought appears saying you are failing. Another says someone has wronged you. Another says you deserve comfort instead of effort. Another says your value depends on approval. These thoughts arrive without permission, but accepting them is not automatic unless you have trained yourself to live unconsciously. The first task each morning is not to chase motivation. It is to examine what the mind is preparing to worship today. Will you worship comfort and avoid necessary difficulty? Will you worship reputation and become anxious over opinions? Will you worship pleasure and lose command over desire? Will you worship emotion and allow moods to dictate conduct? Or will you submit your attention to reason alone? This question determines whether your day belongs to wisdom or confusion. The mind becomes corrupted slowly through repeated carelessness toward attention. You tell yourself one unnecessary story after another until fiction becomes emotional reality. Someone walks past you without greeting you, and immediately the mind invents insult. A problem appears at work and the mind invents catastrophe. A mistake is made and the mind invents permanent failure. None of these judgments arrive from reality itself. They are manufactured internally by a mind untrained in rational examination. You must begin interrupting this process deliberately. When a thought appears, ask yourself whether it deserves residence inside your mind, not whether it feels powerful, not whether it arrived intensely. Ask whether reason confirms its usefulness and truth. A disciplined person does not surrender attention merely because emotion knocks loudly. This practice demands courage because many people are deeply attached to their own disturbances. They rehearse grievances daily. They repeat fears until fear feels like identity. They revisit old humiliations until suffering becomes familiar and strangely comforting. Then they defend these mental habits as if releasing them would mean losing part of themselves. But your wounds do not become wisdom simply because you revisit them constantly. Attention is a moral decision. Whatever you repeatedly focus upon shapes the direction of your character. If your mind constantly studies insult, then you become resentful. If your mind constantly studies pleasure, then you become weak. If your mind constantly studies what others possess, then gratitude disappears and envy governs the soul. The disciplined mind selects carefully what it permits itself to dwell upon. This is why your mornings matter so deeply. The condition of your attention in the first hour often determines the quality of your judgment for the entire day. If you wake and immediately surrender yourself to distraction, then the mind loses stability before reason has even awakened fully. You become mentally scattered before facing a single real responsibility. Do not begin the day consuming noise. Begin the day examining yourself. Sit quietly before the demands of the world begin speaking inside you. Ask what deserves your attention today according to reason and virtue rather than appetite and fear. This question alone can separate a disciplined life from a chaotic one. Perhaps your attention belongs on patience because irritation has been controlling your speech. Perhaps your attention belongs on restraint because desire has been weakening your judgment. Perhaps your attention belongs on courage because avoidance has become your habit. Perhaps your attention belongs on accepting uncertainty because your peace has become dependent upon controlling outcomes. A wise person chooses consciously what inner quality must govern the day ahead. Without deliberate direction, the mind drifts toward whatever is easiest and loudest. This is why people become consumed by trivial matters while neglecting the condition of their own character. They spend hours disturbed by politics, gossip, entertainment, status, and external events while remaining strangers to themselves. Their attention is everywhere, except where real transformation begins. You cannot build inner strength while feeding mental weakness daily. The Stoic discipline of attention requires constant separation between what belongs to you and what does not. Your judgment belongs to you, your choices belong to you, your intentions belong to you, but the actions of others do not belong to you. Public opinion does not belong to you. Chance does not belong to you. Outcomes do not belong to you completely, no matter how carefully you plan. Yet look how much suffering comes from confusing these categories. You replay conversations trying to control how someone sees you. You become angry because events ignored your preferences. You become anxious because the future refuses certainty. You exhaust yourself attempting to command things outside your authority while neglecting the only territory truly yours, which is your own judgment. This confusion destroys peace because the mind cannot remain steady while demanding control over the uncontrollable. Each morning, remind yourself clearly what deserves attention and what deserves release. Your conduct deserves attention. Your honesty deserves attention. Your discipline deserves attention. Your use of time deserves attention. But praise deserves release. Prediction deserves release. The need to be understood by everyone deserves release. Once you begin practicing this separation sincerely, the mind grows quieter because it stops fighting reality itself. There is another danger hidden inside careless attention. The mind eventually resembles whatever it repeatedly consumes. If you spend every day surrounding yourself with outrage, then outrage becomes your temperament. If you spend every day seeking distraction, then stillness becomes unbearable. If you spend every day feeding comparison, then contentment becomes impossible. Your inner life is shaped through repeated exposure. Guard your attention with the seriousness of someone protecting his own character, because that is exactly what you are doing. Many people believe discipline means controlling visible actions alone. They try to regulate speech while allowing inward chaos to continue freely. They force themselves into external routines while internally entertaining resentment, vanity, fear, and self-pity without resistance. But a corrupted inner life eventually reveals itself outwardly, no matter how carefully appearances are managed. Real discipline begins before action. It begins at the level of judgment itself. This is why the Stoic pauses constantly throughout the day, asking whether the mind remains aligned with reason. Not once each month. Not only during crisis, continually. When irritation appears, ask whether the event truly deserves disturbance. When desire appears, ask whether pleasure is attempting to overrule wisdom. When fear appears, ask whether imagination is speaking louder than reality. When pride appears, ask whether ego is seeking importance instead of truth. These questions pull the mind back toward rational governance before impulse gains control. You must also understand that attention can become a form of addiction. The mind begins craving stimulation because silence exposes unresolved disorder. So people remain constantly occupied, not because their lives require it, but because stillness would force confrontation with themselves. Endless entertainment becomes escape from self-examination. But avoidance never heals the mind. It only delays necessary honesty. Sit alone without distraction long enough, and you will begin noticing the hidden movements inside yourself. You will notice how quickly the mind seeks comfort. You will notice how often it invents future fears. You will notice how eagerly it revisits old resentment. You will notice how difficult it feels simply to remain present without mental escape. Do not run from this discovery. This observation is the beginning of wisdom because you cannot govern what you refuse to see clearly. The person who examines his own thinking honestly gains a form of freedom unavailable to the reactive mind. He no longer believes every emotional story automatically. He no longer becomes the servant of passing mental states. He sees thoughts arriving without kneeling before them immediately. This creates inner stability even during difficulty. An insult may appear, but judgment remains calm. A setback may occur, but reason remains steady. An uncertainty may emerge, but panic does not immediately seize the mind. The disciplined person still feels emotion because he is human, but emotion no longer rules unchallenged. You must train this capacity daily because the world constantly competes for your attention. Every distraction promises importance, every outrage demands reaction, every fear insists upon urgency. If you lack philosophical discipline, your mind will become fragmented by endless external demands. A fragmented mind cannot live wisely because wisdom requires sustained attention toward what truly matters. So simplify your inner life. Reduce unnecessary mental noise. Speak less about trivial matters. Spend less time feeding outrage. Stop revisiting injuries that no longer require your suffering. Withdraw attention from useless conflict. Return the mind repeatedly to virtue because virtue alone remains fully within your power. Ask yourself each evening where your attention wandered during the day. What occupied your thoughts most strongly? Was it vanity? Was it resentment? Was it fear? Was it craving for recognition? Or was it the cultivation of patience, courage, restraint, honesty, and rational judgment? Your answer reveals the direction of your life more accurately than your intentions do. Many people intend to live wisely while giving their attention entirely to foolishness. Intention without disciplined attention changes nothing. You become what your mind repeatedly serves. And understand this clearly. Every moment spent feeding unnecessary disturbance weakens your ability to remain stable when genuine hardship arrives. A mind exhausted by trivial emotional battles becomes fragile under real pressure. But a mind trained carefully through daily discipline develops endurance because it no longer reacts blindly to every impulse and appearance. This is why the Stoic life demands vigilance over attention itself. Not as punishment, not as rigid self-denial, but because the quality of your inner life depends entirely upon what you repeatedly permit to occupy the mind. You are shaping yourself through every accepted judgment. You are training yourself through every repeated thought. You are building either clarity or confusion with every object of attention you choose. So when you wake tomorrow, do not immediately offer your mind to the first distraction waiting for you. Do not hand your peace over to noise before reason has spoken. Sit quietly and remember that attention is one of the greatest powers entrusted to you. Direct it carefully. Examine each judgment before accepting it. Refuse mental habits that weaken character. Withdraw attention from what does not belong to your control. Return constantly to what reason confirms as necessary and good. Then move through the day with a mind no longer desperate for stimulation, no longer enslaved by reaction, and no longer willing to suffer over things unworthy of attention. That is how inner order begins. Not through perfect circumstances, not through endless comfort, but through disciplined judgment, deciding carefully what deserves a place inside the mind at all. Number 3. Refuse every thought that weakens disciplined judgment within you. A single thought can destroy the discipline of an entire day if you welcome it without examination. One moment of inward surrender is enough to turn a calm mind into a restless one. You know this already because you have lived it. A thought enters saying you are not capable, and suddenly effort weakens. Another enters saying someone has disrespected you, and suddenly anger begins preparing your words. Another enters saying comfort matters more than duty, and your commitments quietly collapse before the day has even reached its middle hour. Your life is shaped less by events than by the thoughts you repeatedly allow to govern your judgment. This is why inner discipline must begin long before visible action. The battle is not first fought in speech or behavior. It is fought where no one sees it, inside the mind itself. A person who cannot refuse destructive thoughts will eventually obey them, and once obedience becomes habit, the mind loses its ability to stand upright against impulse. You suffer because too many thoughts pass through your mind unquestioned. You hear an inner voice and immediately treat it as truth. You assume that because a thought appears strongly, it must deserve belief. But the disciplined mind does not bow to every impression arriving from emotion, fear, desire, or memory. It pauses, it examines, it asks whether reason confirms the thought or whether weakness has disguised itself as honesty. A thought is not wisdom simply because it feels personal. Look carefully at the kind of thinking that repeatedly weakens your judgment. Thoughts of resentment that replay old injuries until bitterness becomes part of your identity. Thoughts of self-pity that turn temporary hardship into permanent helplessness. Thoughts of comparison that poison gratitude and make another person's success feel like your failure. Thoughts of avoidance that convince you to postpone difficult duties while pretending tomorrow will bring stronger character. None of these thoughts strengthen virtue. None improve judgment. None make you more honest, courageous, disciplined, or just. Yet you entertain them daily as if they deserve a seat within your mind. This is how inner corruption begins, not through dramatic evil, through repeated permission granted to weak thinking. You must become more severe with the condition of your inner life, not cruel toward yourself, not emotionally harsh, but uncompromising with falsehood. The mind left unguarded drifts naturally toward comfort, seeking fear and excuse-making. Discipline requires active resistance against these tendencies because your thoughts influence every choice that follows. An uncontrolled mind cannot produce a stable life. When you wake in the morning, your first responsibility is not to chase pleasure or seek reassurance. Your first responsibility is to inspect the quality of your thinking before it directs your conduct. Sit quietly and observe what thoughts are already waiting to command you. You will discover how quickly the mind begins manufacturing disturbance. One thought predicts failure before effort has begun. Another searches for reasons to avoid responsibility. Another rehearses irritation toward people who have not even spoken to you yet. This is why so many people exhaust themselves before the day truly starts. Their minds have already entered conflict with imagined futures and emotional narratives that reason never approved. The Stoic refuses to become the servant of these internal movements. The moment a weakening thought appears, you must confront it directly, not emotionally. Rationally. Ask yourself whether this thought improves your character or weakens it. Ask whether it moves you closer to virtue or further into confusion. Ask whether it concerns something within your control or something entirely outside your authority. These questions cut through illusion because many thoughts survive only when left unexamined. Consider how often your mind creates suffering from uncertainty alone. A delayed outcome becomes disaster in your imagination. Silence from another person becomes rejection. Difficulty becomes proof that life is against you, yet reality itself has not spoken. Your judgment rushed ahead and invented pain before truth arrived. This habit destroys inner stability because it trains the mind to react emotionally to appearances instead of responding rationally to facts. You must stop treating assumptions as reality. The disciplined person waits before giving mental approval to any thought that disturbs peace or weakens conduct. He understands that impressions arrive automatically, but agreement remains voluntary. This distinction is one of the foundations of inner freedom. Without it, you become trapped inside every emotional reaction passing through consciousness. Observe what happens when anger first appears. The body tightens, the mind searches for offense, speech prepares itself for retaliation. At this stage, you still possess choice. But if you immediately unite yourself with the anger, then judgment becomes corrupted. Soon you begin saying things reason would never approve in moments of clarity. The same pattern appears with fear. A fearful thought arrives, and immediately the mind begins obeying it. Opportunities are avoided, courage weakens, honest action gets postponed. Then fear grows stronger because every act of avoidance trains the mind toward greater dependence on safety. Weak thoughts become powerful when repeatedly obeyed. This is why your inner conversations matter so deeply. The things you tell yourself shape the direction of your character. If you constantly repeat that you are overwhelmed, then endurance declines. If you constantly repeat that discomfort is unbearable, then resilience disappears. If you constantly repeat that your peace depends on external conditions, then your stability becomes fragile. You must speak to yourself with rational honesty instead of emotional indulgence. Do not tell yourself that life should be easier. Tell yourself that difficulty tests judgment. Do not tell yourself that discomfort is unfair. Tell yourself that virtue often requires endurance. Do not tell yourself that another person controls your peace. Tell yourself that your reactions remain your responsibility. This is not denial of emotion. It is refusal to surrender authority to emotion. Many people secretly protect the very thoughts destroying their peace because those thoughts excuse them from responsibility. Resentment allows blame. Self-pity allows passivity. Constant complaint allows avoidance of disciplined action. As long as someone remains emotionally occupied with what others did wrong, he never has to confront the condition of his own character. But the Stoic turns attention inward first, not because the world is perfect, not because others never behave unjustly, but because your own judgment remains the only territory where genuine freedom can be developed. Every hour of your life presents opportunities either to strengthen disciplined judgment or weaken it. You strengthen it each time you refuse unnecessary complaint. You strengthen it each time you endure discomfort without dramatizing it. You strengthen it each time you reject thoughts rooted in vanity, fear, envy, or excuse-making. And you weaken it every time you indulge emotional chaos without examination. This is why mental discipline must become continuous practice rather than occasional effort. The mind changes through repetition. If you repeatedly challenge weak thoughts, reason grows stronger. If you repeatedly entertain them, weakness becomes instinctive. Watch how quickly the mind seeks escape from difficult truths. When responsibility becomes heavy, the mind searches for distraction. When discipline becomes uncomfortable, the mind invents justifications. When self-examination exposes flaws, the mind rushes toward blaming circumstances. The undisciplined person believes these mental movements automatically. The Stoic studies them carefully and refuses to cooperate with them blindly. You must learn to separate yourself from the first impulse rising within you. Your first reaction is not always your highest judgment. Sometimes it is merely habit speaking with confidence. Years of emotional indulgence create automatic patterns of thinking that feel natural simply because they are familiar. But familiarity is not wisdom. A person may spend decades practicing mental weakness while calling it personality. The good news is that character can be retrained through deliberate attention. Each time you refuse a destructive thought, you weaken its authority slightly. Each time you replace emotional exaggeration with rational judgment, you strengthen the governing faculty within yourself. This process is not dramatic. It is quiet and repetitive. Real transformation rarely feels exciting in the moment. It feels like restraint. It feels like pause. It feels like refusing inner permission to thoughts that once ruled you automatically. You begin noticing changes gradually. Insults lose some of their power. Temptations lose some of their urgency. Fear loses some of its ability to dictate decisions. External events stop reaching so deeply into your peace. This happens because disciplined judgment is finally taking its rightful place above impulse. Do not expect the mind to cooperate immediately. Years of careless thinking leave strong habits behind. Some thoughts will return repeatedly even after you begin resisting them. Old fears will revisit you. Old cravings will attempt negotiation. Old resentments will ask for attention again. Your task is not to eliminate every unwanted thought instantly. Your task is to stop granting them authority. A disciplined person can observe destructive thinking without becoming obedient to it. This requires patience because the mind often seeks immediate emotional relief instead of long-term inner strength. It wants comfort now, even if comfort weakens character later. It wants distraction now, even if distraction creates future regret. It wants approval now, even if approval demands dishonesty. Reason must stand against these impulses firmly. Each evening, examine the quality of your thinking throughout the day. Where did weak thoughts gain influence over judgment? Where did fear speak louder than reason? Where did anger distort perception? Where did desire weaken restraint? Do not perform this examination to shame yourself. Perform it to sharpen awareness. An unexamined mind repeats the same errors endlessly because it never studies the source of its own suffering. You are responsible not only for your actions but for the judgments producing those actions. This responsibility cannot be escaped through excuses. Life does not ask whether discipline feels convenient. It asks whether you are willing to govern yourself despite inconvenience. And understand this clearly. Your peace depends less on controlling circumstances than on refusing thoughts that corrupt judgment. A person with disciplined thinking can endure uncertainty, hardship, criticism, and delay without losing inner stability. Another person surrounded by comfort remains miserable because his own mind constantly undermines him. External conditions do not guarantee inner order. Rational judgment does. So begin becoming more selective about what receives belief inside your mind. Stop feeding thoughts that encourage weakness, cowardice, resentment, vanity, and helplessness. Stop rehearsing emotional stories that reduce your ability to act with clarity and virtue. Replace them with thoughts aligned with reality, responsibility, restraint, courage, and disciplined action. Train yourself to ask throughout the day whether your current thinking strengthens your character or quietly erodes it. This question alone can interrupt years of unconscious mental habits. When you wake tomorrow, remember that your mind will present many impressions demanding belief. Some will invite anger, some will invite fear, some will invite self-indulgence, some will invite despair. Do not accept them automatically. Stand guard over your judgment carefully. Examine every thought before allowing it residence within your mind. Refuse whatever weakens reason. Refuse whatever encourages avoidance. Refuse whatever turns you away from disciplined conduct. Then continue through the day with the quiet strength of someone no longer willing to become the servant of destructive thinking. That is where self-governance truly begins. Number 4. Govern your reactions before circumstances begin governing your peace. Your peace is not taken from you by events. It is surrendered by reaction. This is the truth most people avoid because it removes the comforting illusion that suffering is caused by circumstances alone. Yet if circumstances alone determined your inner state, then every person facing difficulty would respond the same way, and you already know this is false. Two people can face identical events and live entirely different inner lives. One remains steady while the other collapses. The difference is never the event, it is the reaction. You have already lived moments where a single reaction shaped the entire direction of your day. A careless word was spoken, and instead of pausing, you answered immediately from emotion. A situation became uncomfortable, and instead of examining it, you resisted it internally with frustration. A delay occurred, and instead of accepting what could not be changed, you mentally fought reality itself. In each case, the outer world did not force suffering upon you. Your ungoverned reaction converted neutrality into disturbance. This is why inner discipline must begin at the point where reaction first arises, not after damage is done, not after words are spoken, not after judgment has already hardened into regret. The real practice of philosophy is the training of the moment between impression and response. Most people never enter this space. They live entirely at the speed of impulse. A stimulus appears and reaction follows instantly. Someone interrupts them and irritation speaks before reason arrives. A difficulty appears and fear begins directing decisions before understanding is complete. A desire appears and action follows before reflection has a chance to intervene. This automatic living creates the illusion of spontaneity, but actually produces internal slavery. To govern yourself means to place reason before reaction every single time without exception. You are not responsible for the first appearance of emotion. Anger can rise without permission. Anxiety can appear without warning. Desire can surface without intention. These movements are part of the human condition. But what defines your character is not the arrival of emotion. It is what you allow it to become through your response. A disciplined mind sees emotion as a signal, not a command. When anger arises, it is not an instruction to act. It is a moment of inspection. When fear arises, it is not a prophecy of failure. It is a moment to examine what is actually within your control. When frustration arises, it is not justification for losing composure. It is a reminder that your expectations may be colliding with reality. If you fail to govern reaction, circumstances will govern your peace without resistance. Every small inconvenience will gain authority over your mood. Every external behavior will determine internal stability. Every unpredictable event will dictate emotional direction. You will believe you are reacting to life, when in truth you are being governed by uncontrolled interpretation of life. This is not weakness caused by the world. It is weakness caused by untrained judgment. You must understand that between what happens and how you respond, there exists a space of choice. This space is not always comfortable because it demands restraint at the exact moment. Emotion demands expression, but this space is where freedom exists. Without it, you are merely repeating instinct dressed as personality. To govern your reactions is to reclaim this space deliberately. Begin each morning with the recognition that the day will present countless moments designed to test your judgment. Not to harm you, but to reveal whether you are governed by reason or impulse. You will be interrupted, you will be misunderstood, you will be challenged, you will encounter inconvenience. None of these events hold power over your inner state unless you surrender reaction before reflection. Before entering the day, remind yourself that nothing external has authority over your mind unless you grant it through response. This is not passive acceptance of everything that happens. It is active control over how you meet what happens. When a situation arises that provokes irritation, pause internally before responding. This pause is not avoidance, it is mastery. In that brief moment, you are choosing whether to add emotional weight to the event or to approach it with clarity. Most people skip this moment entirely and later regret what they said or did. They act first and think afterward. Then they spend hours or days trying to repair what was created in seconds. A governed mind reverses this pattern. It thinks before it responds, even under pressure. Especially under pressure. You will notice that much of your emotional suffering is not caused by events themselves, but by the speed of your reaction to them. Slowing down response reduces suffering dramatically, not because reality changes, but because interpretation becomes disciplined instead of automatic. Consider how often your inner peace is lost through imagined meanings attached too quickly to events. Someone does not respond to you and you immediately assume disrespect. A plan changes and you immediately assume loss of control. A mistake occurs and you immediately assume failure. These assumptions are reactions, not truths, and unexamined reactions become emotional conclusions that may have no foundation in reality. The disciplined person questions interpretation before accepting it. Ask yourself whether what you think is happening is actually happening, or whether your mind has rushed ahead of reason. Many disturbances dissolve the moment they are examined honestly because they were never grounded in fact, only in emotional interpretation. You must also learn to separate the urgency of emotion from the importance of action. Emotion always speaks urgently. It demands immediate response. It insists that delay is dangerous. But urgency is not a measure of truth. It is often a measure of disturbance within the mind itself. Reason does not rush. It observes, evaluates, and then acts. When you react without reflection, you allow urgency to replace wisdom. You trade long-term stability for short-term emotional release. You say something impulsively and feel temporary relief, then experience lasting regret. You avoid discomfort in the moment and create greater difficulty later. You indulge irritation and weaken relationships that require patience. You obey fear and miss opportunities that required courage. Every uncontrolled reaction carries a cost that is often paid in the future. To govern reaction is to refuse this debt. You will find that most emotional reactions are tied to things outside your control: how others behave, how situations unfold, how outcomes develop, how events align with your expectations. Yet none of these belong to your authority. When you react emotionally to what you do not control, you are essentially allowing external chaos to rewrite your internal state. This is why separation is essential. What belongs to you is your judgment in response to events. What does not belong to you is the event itself. The disciplined life is built on this distinction, practiced continuously until it becomes instinct. When insult appears, you do not immediately react with anger. You examine whether the insult has any rational weight, or whether it is simply another person's disorder expressed outwardly. When failure appears, you do not immediately react with despair. You examine what can still be corrected through reasoned action. When success appears, you do not immediately react with pride that blinds judgment. You examine whether continued discipline is still required. Every situation becomes an opportunity to exercise governance over reaction instead of surrendering to it. Without this discipline, the mind becomes reactive terrain constantly shaped by external forces. With it, the mind becomes stable ground that external forces cannot easily disturb. You must also be willing to endure the discomfort of restraint. There will be moments when everything inside you wants to speak immediately, to defend yourself, to retaliate, to escape, to express frustration without filter. In these moments, discipline feels like tension within the body and mind. But this tension is the cost of transformation. Without it, there is no change, only repetition of old patterns. Every time you successfully restrain reaction and allow reason to speak first, you weaken the authority of impulse. Over time, reactions lose their power to command you instantly. A space opens. In that space, you regain choice. This is where freedom begins to take root. You begin noticing that external events still occur but no longer penetrate your inner life as deeply. Words still arrive, but no longer control your emotional direction. Delays still happen, but no longer disrupt your stability. People still act unpredictably, but no longer dictate your internal order. This does not make you indifferent. It makes you stable. Instability is not emotional numbness. It is the ability to remain aligned with reason regardless of circumstance. Each evening, reflect on your reactions throughout the day, not to criticize yourself harshly, but to observe patterns honestly. Where did you react too quickly? Where did emotion speak before reason? Where did you allow external events to govern internal peace? This examination is not punishment. It is training. A mind that never reviews itself remains unaware of its own habits, and what remains unseen cannot be corrected. With time, you will notice a shift. Reaction slows, awareness increases, emotional impulses lose immediacy. You begin to feel the space before response more clearly. In that space, reason becomes accessible again. That is the beginning of mastery. Not control over the world, control over the self in relation to the world. So when tomorrow arrives, do not assume you must react to everything that happens. Assume instead that every moment offers a choice between impulse and reason, between surrender and governance, between disturbance and clarity. Let reason speak before reaction takes control. Let discipline stand before emotion moves you. Let your peace depend not on what happens, but on how you choose to meet what happens. That is where true strength is formed. Number 5. Remember death daily, then waste nothing essential this morning. You walk through your days as if time belongs to you, as if tomorrow is guaranteed, as if your current habits have unlimited opportunities to be corrected later. This illusion is the quiet force behind most wasted lives. It allows you to postpone discipline, delay honesty, and ignore what you already know must be done. It tells you there will always be another morning to begin living correctly. Yet no one ever receives certainty about that next morning. When you forget this, you begin spending yourself on what is not essential. You argue where silence would preserve dignity. You chase comfort where effort would build character. You delay necessary action because the mind assumes endless extension of time. In doing so, you treat your life as if it were not limited, even though every rational observation proves the opposite. To remember death is not to live in fear, it is to live without waste. The mind that forgets mortality becomes careless with attention. It invests energy in trivial concerns. It reacts emotionally to temporary disturbances as if they were permanent truths. It becomes attached to outcomes that may never arrive. It postpones virtue because it believes there will always be opportunity to return to it later, but nothing in experience guarantees later. Only the present moment is fully available to you. Each morning you are not simply beginning another day, you are being granted a continuation of something fragile and uncertain. That awareness alone should change how you think, how you choose, and how you direct your energy. Yet most people move through mornings as if they are stepping into repetition instead of limited opportunity. Look honestly at how much of your life has been spent on what is not essential. Hours consumed by worry over what others think, energy wasted on imaginary conversations in your head, attention given to problems that do not improve your character, emotional suffering created by resisting what could not be controlled. These are not signs of a difficult life, they are signs of a mind disconnected from the awareness of time's finitude. When you remember that your life is not endless, your priorities become sharper. You stop negotiating with distraction, you stop entertaining every impulse, you stop treating every desire as if it deserves fulfillment. You begin asking a more serious question before each action. Does this matter in the face of a life that is already passing beyond my control? This question strips away excess. Most suffering does not come from doing too little. It comes from doing too much of what does not matter. A mind unaware of mortality fills itself with noise because it believes there is always time to recover clarity later. But clarity delayed becomes a pattern of distraction that eventually defines the entire life. You must confront the way your mind uses time as an excuse. You tell yourself you will become disciplined later. You tell yourself you will speak more honestly later. You tell yourself you will fix important habits later. But later is always imagined, never guaranteed. And imagination is not a foundation for responsible living. The disciplined person does not rely on imagined time. He acts as if only the present moment is fully entrusted to him. When you wake in the morning, before you engage with anything external, bring awareness to the simple fact that your time is finite, not as an abstract idea, but as a direct condition of existence. You are not promised uninterrupted continuation of life. You are only given this moment with full certainty. This recognition immediately clarifies what is essential. It removes emotional clutter from decision-making. It exposes how much energy is usually spent on matters that do not contribute to virtue or rational living. It interrupts the tendency to postpone responsibility under the assumption of future correction. Now observe what changes when this awareness is taken seriously. You become more selective with your attention. You stop investing energy in unnecessary arguments. You stop indulging emotional reactions that do not improve your judgment. You stop feeding complaints that only reinforce dissatisfaction. You begin to treat your time as something that must be used with intention rather than consumed passively. This is not urgency driven by anxiety. It is clarity driven by truth. There is a profound difference between rushing through life and living with awareness of its limits. Rushing is emotional disorder. Awareness is rational discipline. One produces chaos. The other produces precision in thought and action. When you remember mortality, you also begin to recognize how much of your suffering is self-created through unnecessary attachment. You cling to outcomes as if they define your worth. You cling to approval as if it determines your value. You cling to comfort as if it guarantees stability. Yet none of these things remain within your control for long, and anything outside your control cannot serve as a foundation for peace. Only your use of this moment belongs entirely to you. This is why wasting energy on what is not essential becomes irrational once seen clearly. Every moment spent in emotional disturbance over uncontrollable outcomes is a moment removed from disciplined action. Every hour spent in complaint is an hour lost from meaningful conduct. Every day spent postponing responsibility is a day that cannot be recovered. When death is remembered properly, urgency disappears and clarity remains. You stop acting from fear of missing out and begin acting from understanding of what truly matters. You begin to see that many things you once treated as important carry no lasting weight. Opinions shift, circumstances change, possessions fade, recognition disappears. Only character remains meaningful when everything else is stripped away. So the question becomes simple and direct. What actions today contribute to character, and what actions merely consume time without strengthening it? This question is uncomfortable because it exposes how often you have chosen comfort over integrity, how often you have chosen distraction over discipline, how often you have chosen avoidance over responsibility. But this discomfort is not harmful, it is corrective. It reveals where attention must be redirected. Each morning you must consciously choose to waste nothing essential. This means identifying what is truly necessary for rational living and refusing to dilute your energy with what is not. It requires separating action that builds character from action that merely fills time. It requires noticing when the mind tries to justify delay through emotional reasoning. You will notice how often unnecessary thoughts appear when you begin this practice. Thoughts about trivial concerns, thoughts about imagined problems, thoughts about seeking ease instead of effort. These thoughts lose authority when measured against the awareness of mortality. They begin to appear less convincing because they cannot justify themselves in the presence of limited time. This awareness sharpens judgment. A disciplined mind does not need to eliminate all activity. It needs to eliminate what is unnecessary. It focuses effort where it produces alignment with reason and virtue. It does not scatter energy across endless distractions. It concentrates on what matters and releases what does not. There is also a deeper transformation that occurs when mortality is kept present in awareness. Emotional reactions lose some of their power. Insults become less significant. Delays become less disturbing. Failures become less defining. Success becomes less intoxicating. Everything external begins to lose the exaggerated weight it once carried, because time itself is understood as limited and unpredictable. This perspective does not make you detached from life. It makes you more precise in how you live it. You begin to see relationships differently. You begin to value honesty over approval. You begin to prioritize meaningful action over superficial validation. You begin to understand that time spent in resentment or fear is time removed from living according to reason. You also become more honest with yourself, because when you remember that life is finite, there is no space left for pretending that you are something you are not. There is no benefit in self-deception when time is limited. The only rational response is to act according to truth rather than illusion. Each evening, reflection becomes essential. You examine how your time was used. You ask whether your actions aligned with what is essential or whether you were pulled into unnecessary disturbance. You observe where emotional impulses consumed attention that could have been directed toward meaningful conduct. This examination is not judgment for its own sake, it is correction. It is training the mind to recognize waste so it becomes less likely to repeat it. Over time, awareness of mortality does not create despair, it creates refinement. The mind becomes lighter because it is no longer burdened by unnecessary attachments. Decisions become clearer because fewer illusions interfere with judgment. Actions become more deliberate because time is no longer treated as infinite resource. You begin to live with quiet seriousness, not heaviness, not fear, but clarity. And this clarity changes how you enter each morning. You no longer approach the day as something to be consumed. You approach it as something to be used wisely. You begin asking what is essential before engaging in anything. You stop postponing what matters because postponement loses its justification when time is seen honestly. Remembering death is not about imagining loss. It is about recognizing value. It reveals what is worth your attention and what has been stealing it without justification. So when you wake tomorrow, before you allow the world to enter your mind, remember that nothing is guaranteed beyond this moment. Do not waste it on what does not contribute to reasoned action or disciplined character. Let awareness of mortality sharpen your choices. Let it remove unnecessary noise from your thinking. Let it guide you toward what is essential. Then move through the day with precision, refusing to waste energy on what cannot strengthen your mind or your conduct. That is how a finite life becomes fully lived rather than quietly spent. Number 6. Separate what depends on you from everything beyond control. You spend most of your mental energy fighting battles you were never meant to win. You argue inwardly with outcomes already decided by forces outside your reach. You replay situations hoping they would have unfolded differently. You attach your peace to things that never belonged to your control in the first place. Then you wonder why your mind feels restless even when nothing is happening. The confusion begins when you fail to distinguish between what is yours and what is not. You treat external events as if they were extensions of your will. You assume effort guarantees outcome. You assume intention guarantees result. You assume fairness governs reality. But life has never operated according to your expectations, and it was never required to. Suffering grows in the space where control is imagined but not possessed. Every moment you spend resisting what is outside your authority is a moment spent weakening your inner stability. You may not notice it at first. It appears as irritation, then frustration, then anxiety, then quiet resignation. But at the root of all these states is the same error. You are attempting to govern what does not belong to you. Look honestly at your daily inner dialogue. How often do you mentally argue with people who are not present? How often do you rehearse conversations that cannot be changed? How often do you feel disappointment over outcomes that were never guaranteed? How often do you believe your peace should depend on how others behave or how situations unfold? This is not reflection. This is mental captivity. A disciplined mind begins by drawing a precise boundary between ownership and illusion of ownership. What belongs to you is your judgment, your intention, your effort, and your moral choice in each moment. What does not belong to you is everything that depends on external conditions, including how events unfold, how others respond, and how the future arranges itself beyond your influence. This separation is not theoretical. It is practical discipline that must be applied continuously throughout the day. When you wake in the morning, your mind immediately begins reaching outward. It attaches to expectations about how the day should proceed. It assumes certain outcomes are necessary for peace. It prepares emotional responses in advance based on imagined scenarios. Without awareness, you begin the day already entangled in things you cannot control. Before any action, you must bring your attention back inward. Ask yourself with complete honesty what is actually within your power in this moment. Not what you wish were within your power, not what you feel should be within your power, but what truly is. You can choose your response to events. You cannot choose the events themselves. You can choose how carefully you act. You cannot guarantee how others will interpret your actions. You can choose to speak with honesty. You cannot guarantee how truth will be received. You can choose discipline. You cannot guarantee external reward for it. This distinction, when understood deeply, dissolves unnecessary suffering. Most emotional disturbance comes from confusing these categories. You believe that because you have invested effort, the outcome must align with your expectation. When reality refuses this assumption, frustration arises. But effort and outcome are not bound together by control. Effort belongs to you. Outcome belongs to a wider order that does not consult your preferences. The mind that refuses this truth remains permanently unsettled. You must learn to release ownership over what was never yours. This is not indifference, it is clarity. You still act with full commitment. You still pursue excellence in what depends on you, but you no longer tie your inner stability to results that exist outside your authority. This shift changes everything about how you experience life. Failure no longer destabilizes your identity because identity is no longer built on external validation. Success no longer inflates your sense of worth because worth was never located in external approval. Delays no longer create panic because time itself is no longer treated as something you control. Instead, your focus remains fixed on the quality of your judgment in the present moment. When you fail to separate control properly, you become emotionally dependent on outcomes. Every uncertainty becomes a threat. Every delay becomes frustration. Every obstacle becomes a sign of injustice. You begin to believe the world is constantly opposing you simply because it does not conform to your expectations. But the world is not opposing you. It is simply unfolding according to its own nature. Your suffering is often created not by reality itself, but by resistance to reality. You attempt to mentally reshape what has already occurred. You demand that past events should be different. You demand that other people should behave differently. You demand that circumstances should align with preference. None of these demands fall within your authority, yet your peace becomes dependent upon them. This is where discipline must intervene. Each time you notice frustration arising, pause and identify whether you are reacting to something within your control or something outside it. If it is outside your control, release emotional resistance immediately. Not because you approve of the situation, but because resistance adds nothing to your capacity to respond wisely. Energy wasted on resistance cannot be used for constructive action. If something is within your control, direct your full attention toward improving your judgment and conduct. If it is outside your control, redirect attention away from emotional struggle and toward acceptance combined with rational response. This simple discipline prevents the mind from collapsing into unnecessary turmoil. You will notice how often your thoughts drift toward what others think of you, how you are perceived, whether you are appreciated, whether you are respected. These concerns feel important, but they are not within your control. You cannot govern perception without controlling every mind that observes you, and that is impossible. When you allow your peace to depend on perception, you surrender your inner stability to forces you cannot manage. Instead, focus only on whether your actions are just, disciplined, and aligned with reason. Let perception follow its own course without your emotional dependence. The same applies to outcomes in work, relationships, and personal goals. You can prepare carefully, act responsibly, and apply full effort, but final outcomes are shaped by variables beyond your reach. If you tie emotional stability to results, you will remain unstable regardless of success or failure. True discipline is measured by how you behave regardless of outcome, not by whether outcome pleases you. This requires continuous correction of expectation. Each morning, examine where your mind is projecting control beyond its proper limits. Notice how quickly the mind tries to claim authority over situations that are inherently uncertain. Gently but firmly bring it back to what is actually yours. Your choices in this moment, your judgment in this moment, your response in this moment, nothing beyond that. When you begin practicing this separation consistently, something important happens internally. Emotional reactivity decreases, not because life becomes easier, but because you stop demanding that life conform to internal preference. You begin meeting events with clarity instead of resistance. This clarity produces steadiness even in difficulty. A difficult situation no longer immediately becomes emotional chaos. It becomes a situation requiring appropriate response. A delay no longer becomes frustration. It becomes time outside your control that does not require emotional disturbance. A disagreement no longer becomes personal offense. It becomes differing judgment between individuals, neither of which you fully control. This shift removes unnecessary weight from experience. Even failure changes in meaning. Instead of becoming a judgment about your worth, it becomes feedback about your action. Something within your control can be improved. Something outside your control is simply acknowledged without emotional distortion. You also begin to see how much energy was previously wasted on attempting to manage outcomes mentally. Constant worrying, rehearsing, and imagining are forms of false control. They create the illusion of influence while producing only exhaustion. When you separate control correctly, mental energy returns to its proper function. Instead of worrying about outcomes, you begin refining action. Instead of predicting the future, you focus on responsible conduct in the present. Instead of resisting reality, you engage with it directly. This produces a quieter mind, not because thoughts disappear, but because conflict between desire and reality decreases. You are no longer trying to force the world into agreement with your expectations. You are aligning yourself with what is actually possible and acting within that boundary with discipline. Each evening you must examine where this separation was maintained and where it was lost. Where did you attach emotional stability to outcomes beyond your control? Where did you resist what could not be changed? Where did you forget that your authority exists only within your judgment? This reflection is not about blame. It is about restoring accuracy to perception. Without accuracy, discipline cannot develop. Without discipline, suffering repeats in cycles. Over time, consistent practice of this separation builds a stable inner foundation. You become less disturbed by external events because your sense of control is no longer misplaced. You act fully where action is possible and remain steady where it is not. That is the beginning of genuine inner freedom. Not control over everything, but clarity about what was never yours to control in the first place. Number 7. Train your desires until nothing external masters your judgment. You keep calling it desire as if it were harmless, as if it were simply preference, as if it were something that appears and disappears without consequence. But look honestly at your life, and you will see that untrained desire has been quietly governing your judgment for years. It decides what you chase, it decides what you avoid, it decides what feels unbearable and what feels urgent. And because you never trained it, it has been training you instead. Every time you feel pulled towards something external and immediately obey that pull without examination, you strengthen its authority over your mind. A craving appears and you follow it. A discomfort appears and you escape it. A comparison arises and you feel diminished. A temptation rises and you rationalize it. Over time, this creates a pattern where your choices are no longer chosen. They are reactions to internal pressure that you never questioned. This is how a person becomes ruled without noticing the transition. You believe you are making decisions freely, but much of what you call choice is simply desire expressing itself without resistance. And when desire is untrained, it does not aim at what is good for you. It aims at what is immediately pleasant, immediately easier, immediately comforting. It has no concern for discipline, for character, or for long-term stability. It only seeks release. If you follow it blindly, you will always feel controlled by something outside yourself, even when nothing external is present. That is why training desire is not optional. It is the foundation of inner freedom. Because a mind ruled by desire cannot remain stable when life becomes difficult. It collapses whenever it does not receive what it expects. It becomes irritated when reality does not match preference. It becomes restless when pleasure is delayed. It becomes anxious when comfort is threatened. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin organizing your entire life around avoiding discomfort rather than building strength. Look carefully at how your desires speak to you throughout the day. They do not present themselves as commands. They disguise themselves as necessity. They say you need comfort to function. They say you need approval to feel secure. They say you need easier conditions to perform well. They say you need immediate relief from anything uncomfortable. But none of this is true. It is simply persuasion aimed at weakening discipline. If you never question these impulses, you begin to obey them as if they were rational instructions. And every time you obey without examination, you teach the mind that desire is trustworthy. This is how dependence grows. A disciplined life begins when you stop assuming desire is correct by default. You are not required to suppress desire completely. You are required to govern it. There is a difference between being free of desire and being free from being ruled by it. The first is unrealistic. The second is the essence of rational living. To govern desire means to place reason above impulse at the exact moment impulse appears, not later after regret, not after indulgence, at the moment it arises. When desire says avoid difficulty, reason must respond with clarity that avoidance weakens character. When desire says, "Seek pleasure immediately," reason must respond with awareness that impulse often sacrifices long-term stability for short-term relief. When desire says you cannot endure discomfort, reason must respond by showing that endurance has already been proven possible in countless moments of your life. This is not denial of feeling. It is correction of judgment. The untrained mind confuses intensity with truth. A strong desire feels convincing simply because it is strong, but strength of feeling has no connection to correctness. Many destructive actions feel powerful in the moment. Many beneficial actions feel difficult in the beginning. If you allow intensity to guide you, you will repeatedly choose what weakens you while believing you are acting naturally. Natural does not mean wise. You must begin each morning with awareness that desire will attempt to direct your decisions throughout the day. It will present itself in many forms. The desire for comfort will discourage effort. The desire for approval will distort honesty. The desire for distraction will weaken focus. The desire for ease will resist discipline. Your task is not to eliminate these movements. Your task is to refuse immediate obedience. Before acting on any desire, pause and examine whether it strengthens or weakens your capacity for rational judgment. This pause is the space where freedom exists. Without it, desire becomes automatic authority. Most people do not realize how deeply their life is shaped by unexamined desire. They choose work based on comfort rather than growth. They choose relationships based on validation rather than character. They choose habits based on immediate relief rather than long-term strength. Then they wonder why their life feels unstable even when external conditions appear acceptable. The answer is simple. A life governed by desire is never stable because desire itself is unstable. It constantly shifts, it constantly escalates, it constantly seeks more of what it already has and rejects what it does not immediately enjoy. If you build your decisions upon it, you are building on movement rather than foundation. Training desire means teaching the mind to tolerate discomfort without panic. It means learning to remain steady when impulses demand immediate satisfaction. It means refusing to interpret lack of pleasure as a problem that must be solved instantly. It means recognizing that discipline often begins where comfort ends. When you first resist desire, you will feel internal resistance. The mind will protest. It will argue that discipline is unnecessary. It will insist that comfort is deserved. It will attempt negotiation. It will present reasons why now is not the right time to act with restraint. These arguments feel personal, but they are simply habitual patterns trying to preserve themselves. You must not debate them emotionally. You must observe them rationally and proceed according to principle. Each time you refuse an untrained desire, you weaken its authority. Each time you choose discipline over impulse, you strengthen your capacity for self-governance. This is not achieved through occasional effort. It is built through repeated decisions in small moments that appear insignificant but accumulate into character. A person who trains desire becomes less dependent on external conditions. Comfort no longer dictates behavior. Discomfort no longer interrupts action. Praise no longer determines worth. Criticism no longer destabilizes identity. The mind becomes anchored not in changing circumstances, but in rational control over response. This is inner freedom. It does not mean life becomes easier. It means life no longer controls your judgment. You will notice that untrained desire often operates through exaggeration. It makes discomfort feel unbearable when it is only temporary. It makes pleasure feel essential when it is only optional. It makes delay feel like loss when it is only timing. It distorts perception so that immediate satisfaction appears more important than stable character. Your task is to correct this distortion through reason. Ask yourself whether the desire you are feeling is aligned with long-term clarity or short-term relief. Ask whether acting on it would strengthen your ability to govern yourself or weaken it. Ask whether you are responding as a rational being or as a temporary impulse seeking escape. These questions return authority to judgment. Without this practice, the mind becomes a servant to whatever appears strongest in the moment. With it, the mind becomes a deliberate governor of internal life. You must also recognize how desire influences suffering. Much of your frustration comes not from lack of fulfillment, but from attachment to specific outcomes. When reality does not match expectation, desire interprets this mismatch as injustice, but reality is not obligated to fulfill preference. It simply unfolds according to conditions beyond your control. Suffering arises when desire demands agreement from reality instead of adapting itself to what is actually possible. Training desire means loosening this demand. It means reducing emotional dependence on specific outcomes. It means acting fully without requiring emotional reward from external results. It means finding stability in disciplined action itself, rather than in what that action produces. Each evening, you must review where desire governed your behavior without resistance. Where did you act from impulse rather than reason? Where did you choose comfort over discipline? Where did you allow craving to override judgment? This reflection is not punishment, it is calibration. It restores clarity where habit has created distortion. Over time, consistent training transforms your relationship with desire. It no longer feels like an internal master issuing commands. It becomes a signal that is observed but not automatically obeyed. You begin to see desire the way you see weather. It exists, it moves, it changes, but it does not govern your conduct. This shift is subtle but profound. It marks the transition from being controlled internally to being governed by reason. And once reason becomes the guiding force, external circumstances lose much of their power over your inner state. Because what once controlled you from within no longer dictates your decisions. So when you wake tomorrow, do not assume your desires should be trusted simply because they appear strongly. Do not assume comfort is always right or discomfort is always wrong. Do not assume impulse deserves immediate fulfillment. Pause, examine, allow reason to speak before desire acts. Train your desires until nothing external masters your judgment and nothing internal overrules your reason. That is the beginning of real self-command. Number 8. Endure present hardship without surrendering virtue for temporary comfort. You already know what it feels like to choose comfort over principle in a difficult moment. You know the subtle inner negotiation that happens when hardship appears and the mind immediately searches for escape. It does not present itself as betrayal. It presents itself as reason. It says this is too much right now. It says you deserve relief. It says you can return to discipline later when conditions improve, and in that moment, without resistance, virtue is quietly exchanged for convenience. This exchange is where inner strength begins to weaken. Hardship itself is not what damages you. It is the way you respond to hardship. Two people can face the same difficulty and emerge with entirely different inner states. One preserves clarity while the other loses composure. One continues acting according to principle while the other abandons it for immediate relief. The difference is never the situation. It is whether virtue is maintained or surrendered under pressure. You must understand this clearly. Every moment of discomfort carries a hidden decision point. Either you remain aligned with reason, or you allow temporary comfort to dictate behavior. There is no neutral position. Either discipline is strengthened, or it is weakened through your response. Most suffering during hardship comes from resistance to the experience itself. The mind interprets discomfort as something wrong that must be immediately removed. It treats difficulty as a signal that something has gone wrong with life, rather than recognizing it as a natural condition of existence. This interpretation creates unnecessary emotional struggle layered on top of the actual challenge. But hardship does not become heavier because you resist it. It only feels heavier. When you surrender virtue for comfort, you do not remove difficulty, you only postpone it and often increase it. Avoidance in the present moment creates greater instability in the future. A decision made to escape discomfort rarely produces long-term stability. It produces dependency on avoidance as a habit, and that habit weakens your capacity to endure what is necessary. You have already experienced this pattern. A difficult task is avoided in favor of ease and later becomes a heavier burden. A necessary conversation is postponed and later becomes more complicated. A moment of discomfort is escaped and later returns multiplied by consequence. Each instance teaches the same lesson. Temporary comfort purchased at the expense of discipline becomes long-term instability, yet the mind continues to repeat the same error because it is trained to prioritize immediate relief over rational endurance. To live according to reason is to reverse this training. Enduring hardship without surrendering virtue requires a different relationship with discomfort. Instead of viewing it as something to escape, you begin to view it as something to be navigated with discipline intact. The presence of difficulty no longer justifies abandoning your principles. It simply becomes the context in which your principles are tested. A disciplined mind does not ask how quickly discomfort can be removed. It asks how it can respond rightly within the discomfort. This shift changes everything. It means that even in difficult circumstances, your focus remains on what is within your control, your judgment, your action, your restraint, your honesty. These remain available regardless of external conditions. No hardship can take them from you unless you surrender them voluntarily. And yet this is exactly what happens when comfort is chosen over principle. You give away something stable for something temporary. You exchange integrity for ease. You trade long-term strength for short-term relief. And in doing so, you weaken your future ability to handle similar situations. Look closely at how often you justify small compromises. You tell yourself it is only for now. You tell yourself it will not matter. You tell yourself you will correct it later. But each small compromise teaches the mind that principle is optional when pressure appears. Over time, this creates a habit where discomfort automatically triggers abandonment of discipline. This is how character slowly erodes without dramatic collapse. The Stoic approach requires interruption of this pattern at the exact moment it begins. When hardship appears and comfort tempts you toward compromise, you must pause and examine what is actually being asked of you. Is this situation demanding surrender of virtue, or is it simply demanding endurance? Virtue must never be surrendered. Endurance must always be developed. There is a difference between relieving pain and abandoning principle. Relief seeks immediate comfort regardless of cost. Discipline accepts discomfort while maintaining alignment with reason. One weakens future capacity, the other strengthens it. Each morning you must prepare for the possibility that discomfort will appear in various forms, not to create anxiety, but to prevent surprise. A prepared mind is less likely to panic when difficulty arises. When you expect hardship as part of life, rather than exception to it, you stop interpreting it as personal misfortune and begin responding to it as natural reality. This perspective removes emotional exaggeration from experience. When hardship arrives, observe your first reaction carefully. The mind will attempt to negotiate. It will suggest easier alternatives. It will present avoidance as reasonable. It will attempt to reframe discipline as unnecessary in this moment. These internal arguments feel persuasive only when not examined. You must not debate them emotionally. You must evaluate them rationally. Ask whether the proposed escape preserves your integrity or compromises it. Ask whether it strengthens your capacity to endure or weakens it. Ask whether it aligns with the person you intend to become or only with the impulse seeking relief. These questions cut through illusion because they return authority to reason rather than allowing comfort to dictate behavior. Hardship often exposes where your values are not yet stable. It reveals the gap between what you claim to believe and what you actually practice when pressure increases. It is easy to speak about discipline when nothing is being demanded. It is far more revealing to observe what you choose when discomfort requires sacrifice. Virtue is not tested in theory, it is tested in resistance. You must learn to remain steady even when everything inside you wants to abandon steadiness. This does not mean suppressing emotion, it means refusing to allow emotion to determine conduct. You may feel exhaustion, frustration, or impatience. These states are natural responses to difficulty, but they are not instructions for behavior. Feelings are not commands, they are conditions to be observed. When you begin to separate feeling from action, hardship loses much of its power over you. You can endure discomfort without internal collapse because your decisions are no longer governed by emotional urgency. You act according to principle even while emotion continues to fluctuate in the background. This is where real strength develops, not in the absence of difficulty, but in the refusal to abandon discipline within it. You will notice that most moments of temptation toward comfort are brief. They arise sharply, demand attention, and then fade if not immediately obeyed. The strength of these moments depends on how quickly you respond. If you delay reaction and allow rational evaluation, their power diminishes significantly. If you obey instantly, they become habit. The space between impulse and action is where virtue is preserved. Hardship also teaches something deeper about your own limits. Many of the boundaries you assume exist are not real limitations but untested assumptions. You believe you cannot endure certain levels of discomfort until you are forced to endure them. You believe certain situations are unbearable until you pass through them without surrendering discipline. Experience reveals that you are capable of more than your comfort has trained you to believe. Each act of endurance expands your capacity for future stability. Each refusal to abandon principle strengthens internal resilience. Each moment of disciplined response builds trust in your own rational judgment. Over time, hardship becomes less threatening, not because it disappears, but because your response to it becomes more stable. The same situation that once created emotional collapse becomes an opportunity to exercise clarity. You begin to recognize that suffering is often amplified by resistance and reduced by acceptance combined with correct action. At the end of each day, examine where you surrendered virtue for comfort, not to dwell in regret, but to understand the pattern. Where did you avoid necessary effort? Where did you choose ease over honesty? Where did you allow discomfort to dictate behavior? This reflection is necessary because unexamined surrender becomes repeated surrender. Awareness interrupts repetition. With consistent practice, you begin to notice that comfort loses its authority over your decisions. It no longer appears as something you must obey. It becomes a suggestion that must pass through rational evaluation. Sometimes you will choose rest, and that can be rational, but the choice is no longer automatic. It is examined. This is the difference between weakness and discipline. So when you wake tomorrow and hardship appears in any form, do not immediately seek escape. Do not rush toward comfort as first response. Pause and remember that your character is not formed in ease, but in how you respond when ease is unavailable. Let reason remain steady when conditions become difficult. Let discipline remain intact when comfort calls for surrender. Let virtue remain non-negotiable regardless of pressure. Then continue forward without abandoning yourself in the moment you are tested. That is how strength is built, where it actually matters. Number 9. Examine every impulse before acting against your highest rational nature. You are not disturbed by life as much as you are disturbed by impulses you never examine. A moment arises, a feeling follows, and before reason has time to speak, action is already in motion. You call this spontaneity. But in truth, it is ungoverned reaction dressed as choice. And each time you obey it without question, you move further away from the rational nature you are capable of embodying. Every impulse feels urgent when it first appears. It presents itself as necessary, correct, and immediate. Anger tells you to speak without restraint. Desire tells you to act without reflection. Fear tells you to withdraw without examination. Pride tells you to assert yourself without wisdom. Yet none of these voices are concerned with truth. They are concerned only with expression, and expression without examination is how judgment becomes distorted. You must understand that impulses are not commands. They are appearances in the mind that require evaluation, not obedience. The disciplined life begins when you refuse to accept any internal movement as authoritative until it has been examined by reason. This single habit separates the reactive mind from the rational mind. Without it, you are carried by whatever feeling is strongest in the moment. With it, you regain authority over your own conduct. Most people never develop this discipline. They assume that because a thought or impulse is felt strongly, it must be acted upon. They confuse intensity with correctness. This is why they repeatedly act against their own long-term interest, while believing they are simply being natural. But what is natural for a rational being is not impulse. It is examined choice. You were given the capacity to pause between impulse and action. That pause is where your humanity becomes conscious instead of mechanical. Yet you often ignore this space. You let emotional force move faster than reflection. You allow the first interpretation of a situation to become final judgment. You respond to words without considering intention. You react to events without distinguishing what is within your control. You act before understanding is complete, and then experience consequences you did not anticipate. This pattern creates unnecessary suffering. Not because impulses exist, but because they are unexamined. To examine every impulse before acting is to restore order to the mind. It is to place reason in its rightful position as guide rather than follower. Reason does not suppress life. It organizes it. It does not eliminate feeling. It evaluates whether feeling should lead action. Each impulse must be treated as a proposal, not a command. Before acting, ask whether this impulse aligns with your highest rational nature, not your immediate preference, not your emotional reaction, but the part of you capable of judgment, restraint, and long-term understanding. Your highest rational nature does not act from irritation. It does not act from fear. It does not act from uncontrolled desire. It acts from clarity. It asks what is appropriate, what is just, what is necessary, and what is within your control. Anything that does not pass this evaluation should not become action. You already know what it feels like to act without examination. Words spoken in anger that damage relationships, decisions made in frustration that later require repair, choices driven by impulse that conflict with your deeper intentions. These moments are not accidents. They are the predictable outcome of unexamined reaction, and each one reinforces a habit of ungoverned behavior. The mind that never examines impulse becomes increasingly reactive over time. It loses sensitivity to reflection. It begins to trust emotional urgency more than rational evaluation. It assumes that immediate feeling reflects truth. This is how judgment becomes unstable. To reverse this pattern, you must slow down the relationship between impulse and action, not by eliminating spontaneity, but by inserting awareness into the process. When an impulse appears, do not immediately resist it or obey it. Observe it first, name it internally, recognize its emotional origin, then bring it before reason for evaluation. This is where freedom exists. Freedom is not the absence of impulse. It is the ability to decide whether impulse deserves action. You will notice that many impulses weaken when they are examined. Anger loses intensity when its assumptions are questioned. Fear loses authority when its predictions are challenged. Desire loses urgency when its consequences are considered clearly. Most impulses rely on immediacy to maintain influence. Once delayed, they lose persuasive power. This delay is not hesitation, it is clarity in motion. The untrained mind mistakes delay for weakness. It believes that quick reaction is strength. But strength is not measured by speed, it is measured by accuracy of judgment. Acting quickly without understanding is not strength, it is surrender to internal pressure. To live according to rational nature is to ensure that no action occurs without alignment between impulse and reason. If alignment is absent, action must not proceed. This discipline prevents regret before it forms. You must also recognize how impulses often disguise themselves as moral necessity. Anger claims injustice must be corrected immediately. Desire claims fulfillment is essential now. Fear claims avoidance is safety. Yet when examined, these claims are often exaggerated or incomplete. Reason reveals context that impulse ignores. Without examination, you act on partial information and call it certainty. Each morning you must prepare the mind for this practice, not by attempting to eliminate impulses, but by committing to observe them without automatic obedience. Decide in advance that no feeling will be allowed to govern action without evaluation. This intention alone begins to weaken reactive habit. Throughout the day, countless impulses will arise. The disciplined response is always the same. Pause, observe, evaluate, then act only if alignment with rational nature is confirmed. If not, do not act. Let the impulse pass without granting it authority. At first, this will feel unnatural because you are interrupting long-established patterns. The mind will insist that immediate response is necessary. It will create urgency where none exists. It will suggest that delay leads to loss of opportunity. But these are familiar justifications used by impulse to avoid examination. You must not negotiate with them. You must observe them and remain steady. Over time, something important happens. The space between impulse and action expands naturally. You begin to notice impulses earlier, before they gain strength. You begin to see patterns in your reactions. You begin to recognize which impulses consistently lead to regret and which align with rational stability. This awareness changes your relationship with yourself. You are no longer at the mercy of internal reactions. You become the one who evaluates them, and in that evaluation lies true self-governance. You also begin to see how many conflicts in your life were not caused by external events, but by unexamined impulses. A harsh word spoken without reflection escalated a situation unnecessarily. A defensive reaction created misunderstanding where none needed to exist. An impulsive decision introduced instability that could have been avoided. When impulse is examined, many conflicts dissolve before they form. This is not suppression of expression. It is refinement of expression through reason. At the end of each day, reflect on where impulse governed action without examination. Do not judge yourself harshly. Observe honestly. Identify moments where pause was absent. Identify where reason was bypassed. Identify where emotional urgency became action. This reflection strengthens awareness for the next cycle. Without reflection, impulse repeats itself unnoticed. With reflection, it becomes visible and therefore governable. Over time, this practice reshapes identity. You begin to see yourself not as someone who reacts, but as someone who chooses, not as someone who is carried by feeling, but as someone who evaluates feeling before acting. This shift is subtle but profound. It is the difference between internal chaos and rational order. Eventually, impulses still arise, but they no longer define your behavior. They become signals to be examined rather than forces to be obeyed. Reason remains steady even when emotion fluctuates. This is the essence of disciplined living. Not the absence of internal movement, but the presence of consistent evaluation before action. So when the next impulse appears, do not rush to obey it. Do not rush to suppress it. Bring it into awareness. Examine whether it belongs in the life you are trying to build according to reason. If it does, act. If it does not, let it pass. Let nothing bypass your judgment without examination. Let nothing override your rational nature without consent. That is how control is reclaimed from within. Number 10. Dedicate each morning completely toward wisdom, discipline, and inner freedom. You do not become free by changing the world. You become free by changing the direction of your attention each morning before the world begins pulling on it. Most people wake already surrendered. They open their eyes and immediately give their mind away to notifications, worries, expectations, and imagined problems. Before they have even chosen how to think, the day has already begun thinking for them. That is not living with discipline. That is mental abandonment. To dedicate each morning toward wisdom, discipline, and inner freedom is to refuse this surrender. It is to reclaim the first hour of consciousness as sacred territory governed by reason rather than reaction. If you do not govern the beginning of your day, you will not govern the middle or the end. The mind that starts in disorder rarely finds order later without effort. You must understand that the morning is not neutral. It is formative. It sets the direction for judgment, reaction, and attention. If you begin it with scattered thinking, you carry scattering into every decision that follows. If you begin it with clarity, you create a standard that the rest of the day must meet. Yet you have likely spent many mornings reinforcing the opposite. You wake and immediately engage with external input before examining internal condition. You consume information before forming intention. You react to the world before clarifying your own principles. This is how the mind becomes shaped by everything except reason. To dedicate your morning to wisdom is to reverse this pattern completely. Wisdom begins with examining what is within your control and what is not before anything else enters your mind, not as theory, but as immediate orientation. You remind yourself that your judgments, choices, and responses belong to you. Everything else does not. This single distinction protects you from unnecessary disturbance throughout the day. Without this reminder, you unconsciously attach your stability to things that can shift at any moment. The behavior of others, the outcome of events, the approval of people you may never fully understand. When these external factors fluctuate, your mind fluctuates with them. But when you begin the day anchored in what belongs to you, external instability loses authority over your inner state. Discipline is the second foundation of the morning. Not discipline as pressure or self-denial for its own sake, but discipline as the ability to align action with reason even when impulse resists. The undisciplined mind obeys comfort, habit, and emotion without question. The disciplined mind evaluates every impulse before allowing it to become action. Each morning you must prepare for the fact that impulses will arise throughout the day seeking immediate expression. Laziness will suggest avoidance. Desire will suggest indulgence. Irritation will suggest reaction. Fear will suggest withdrawal. These impulses are not commands. They are tests of whether reason is present or absent in your decision-making. If you begin the morning without discipline, you will fail these tests by default. Inner freedom is the third foundation, and it depends entirely on the first two. Without wisdom and discipline, freedom is misunderstood as doing whatever you want. But that is not freedom. That is dependence on impulse. Real freedom is the ability to remain steady regardless of internal pressure or external circumstance. A person is not free when they can act without restraint. A person is free when they can choose reason over impulse consistently, even when impulse feels stronger. When you dedicate your morning to inner freedom, you are not seeking comfort. You are training independence from emotional volatility. You are building the capacity to remain stable when life does not align with preference. You are preparing your mind to function without being governed by disturbance. Most suffering in daily life comes from entering the day without this preparation. You wake and immediately allow external reality to define internal state. If something pleasant occurs, you feel elevated. If something unpleasant occurs, you feel diminished. This dependence turns every event into a regulator of mood, but your mood was never meant to be governed by external randomness. It was meant to be governed by rational judgment. To begin the morning properly, you must first bring attention inward before it goes outward. Notice the condition of your mind before it interacts with anything else. Is it reactive, scattered, or calm? Is it already chasing concerns that have not occurred? Is it already attached to expectations that cannot be guaranteed? This honest observation is not self-criticism. It is orientation toward clarity. From this point, you establish intention, not vague motivation, but deliberate alignment with rational conduct. You decide in advance that your actions will not be governed by impulse. You decide that external events will not determine internal stability. You decide that your attention will not be wasted on what does not contribute to wisdom or disciplined action. Without this intention, the mind drifts into default patterns shaped by habit. With it, you begin to direct behavior consciously rather than reactively. Throughout the day, countless opportunities will arise to abandon this morning commitment. Situations will challenge your patience. People will test your composure. Unexpected events will attempt to pull you into emotional reaction. These moments are not disruptions to your practice. They are the practice. Each one reveals whether the morning dedication was genuine or superficial. If you respond without reflection, you lose the discipline you intended to build. If you pause, examine, and act according to reason, you strengthen it. Nothing external determines this outcome. Only your response does. This is why morning dedication must be renewed internally, not left as a forgotten intention. The mind forgets easily under pressure, unless trained repeatedly. You must recall your commitment in real time, whenever impulse appears, not after regret, but before action. Wisdom is not something you acquire once. It is something you apply continuously. As you move through your day, you will notice how often unnecessary suffering arises from misaligned attention. You worry about outcomes you cannot control. You compare yourself to people whose circumstances you do not fully understand. You attach meaning to events that are neutral in themselves. These mental habits consume energy without producing clarity. Morning discipline is what interrupts this pattern before it strengthens. When attention is trained early, it becomes less vulnerable later. When judgment is aligned early, reaction becomes more measured later. When inner direction is established early, external disturbance loses influence later. At the end of each day, you must examine whether your morning intention was maintained, not in a spirit of judgment, but in honest assessment. Where did attention drift away from wisdom? Where did discipline weaken under pressure? Where did external events take control of internal stability? This reflection is essential because without it, the mind assumes it is already disciplined even when it is not. Awareness of failure is what allows correction. Without awareness, repetition continues unnoticed. Over time, consistent morning dedication transforms how you experience life. You begin to notice that external events still occur but no longer dictate your inner condition as strongly. Impulses still arise but no longer automatically govern behavior. Emotional reactions still appear but no longer define direction. There is a growing space between stimulus and response, where reason operates more consistently. That space is where freedom lives, not freedom from events, but freedom from being governed by them internally. You stop beginning the day as a passive recipient of circumstances and begin it as an active participant in your own mental direction. You stop reacting to life as it arrives and start engaging it with deliberate intention already set. This does not eliminate difficulty. It eliminates unnecessary confusion within difficulty. So when tomorrow begins, do not allow your first attention to be scattered outward. Bring it inward first. Establish clarity before contact with external noise. Set discipline before reaction begins. Align judgment before impulse has influence. Dedicate the morning not to distraction, not to reaction, not to habit, but to wisdom that guides your thinking, discipline that governs your action, and inner freedom that remains steady regardless of what unfolds. Then move into the day with a mind that is no longer available for unexamined control.